Welcome to the Learning Reinvented Podcast, brought to you by myself, Katie Godden, and the team at The Learning Effect. There are lots of learning podcasts out there, so we wanted to do something slightly different. This week, we'll be looking at embedding learning into our everyday lives. I'm delighted to welcome Kevin Redmond to the podcast. Kevin, do you want to introduce yourself and tell our listeners a little bit about your background and what you're currently up to?
Yeah, so I am based in Dublin here in Ireland, and I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Tribel, which is short for Tribe of Learning, or Tribe of Learners really, but Tribe of Learning is the official line. And my background, I suppose, I started my professional life as an electronic engineer, and I worked at that for maybe 20 minutes before I realized this isn't for me. And when I was in college getting that degree, rather than getting a job in a bar or a restaurant or something, I started to teach. I don't know if everyone else calls it grinds. We call it like private tutoring. Like I'd go to a teenager's house and show them quadratic equations kind of thing. And I made an awful lot of money doing that. It was unreal, the amount of, it's still to this day the most disposable cash I've ever had in my life, I think, is when I was doing those that tutoring. But another thing that happened while I was doing that is I fell in love with teaching. I fell in love with the concept of getting something from my head into somebody else's head, and became like a problem to be solved every time. And finished my degree, and I went straight then into teaching. I actually went to Wales, to Aberystwyth, and went to study to become a maths and a physics teacher. Came back and I worked at that over here for a few years, and then I worked for a company delivering study skills. So we used to teach mind maps and memory techniques and all real strategy, I suppose, for students to learn and show them how their brains worked, essentially, and show them that their memory is perfectly fine. And it was a very rewarding job because it was it was a way to validate the students. But something interesting happened in parallel with that, and that is that I was working as a contractor for that company, which meant I had time to do other things as well. And I started to develop content for professionals. So leadership skills, communication skills, persuasion, and I wasn't just basing it on nothing. I actually had a side business at the time as well. I was on Dragon's Den actually, and in the Irish version of Dragon's Den with that, but it's a whole other story. But I had some background in understanding sales and persuasion and that kind of thing. And what I realized is that with those two things happening in parallel, that I was delivering study skills like memory techniques, showing students and parents and teachers how to memorize content and how to retain it in their head. I was then going and delivering content into companies, and what they really wanted was for somebody to stand in front of 10 or 12 people for 4 hours and talk about persuasion, talk about leadership, talk about whatever. And there was no backup. There was no follow-up to reinforce the content. There was no way of checking that there was a transfer of learning, that anyone actually learned anything. And I always knew that, and I always wanted to kind of put the two things together, but there wasn't really an appetite for it then. People just wanted, no, we just need to tick this box and come in and talk to the employees for 4 hours about whatever they wanted me to talk about. And I'd tell great stories, and I'd use analogies and statistics and facts and humor, and I'd engage them, and it would all be great, and the feedback would be amazing. I'd get really good feedback on the content. But I knew in the back of my head from my other job that they were not going to remember. Not only were they not going to remember anything, they wouldn't even remember I was there in 2 weeks' time or 3 weeks' time. So anyway, this went around in my head for years. I ended up going to work for an e-learning company, then a startup, and learned a huge amount then about the online space and how all that works. But I still had this in the back of my head that the way training is being delivered into companies is just inefficient. And because it's inefficient, it becomes a tick the box exercise. It becomes something that people just get through, and it's a hit and hope. It's a Hail Mary. They just hope some of it sticks. And working with the e-learning company, knowing about the memory techniques, understanding that the way people were delivering content wasn't working. This went round and round in my head, like I said, and I started a company I half started a company, I would say maybe 4 years ago, 4.5 years ago. And you can probably still find some of the content out there. It was called Use Because, and there's a story why, but I called it Use Because. But I never really committed to it because I didn't have anyone else with me. But what that did for me is it allowed me to build a philosophy of what professional education should be and what it should look like. And as frustrating as it was for those few years, like I was still, young kids and mortgage and all that, like everybody, like a lot of people, had to keep the lights on at home, so I couldn't go into it full time by myself. I didn't know how to build a website, didn't know, how to do all the back end things. But I knew I was developing a philosophy of what the education should look like end to end. And I came up with a very simple 3-pillar philosophy, if you like. And it's this, that you have to understand your newly acquired knowledge, you have to remember it, and you have to deliberately practice it. And I'll explain what I mean by each of those things. You have to understand, like say, for example, and I'll talk a little bit about where our content comes from, but it's books, and I'll get into that in a minute. But one of the most famous self-help books or business books is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of the first habit in that is to be proactive. So what we want to do with our platform at Tribel is we want to make sure that people understand how they can apply, for example, be proactive to their professional and to their personal lives. So we present it to them in a way that they're able to think, oh, I know where I could put that. I know what I could do with that. That's the first step to really learning something, is to understand it and understand where you could apply it in your own life. The second thing then, to remember it, doesn't mean remember it written in a notebook somewhere or saved in a Google Drive somewhere. You have to remember it at the moment of truth. So when you're in the middle of a sales conversation, or when you are having a difficult conversation with one of your direct reports, or in the middle of a hiring process with a new candidate or something, you have to have it in your mind, in your head. And the third thing you need to do then is to not just practice, but to deliberately practice. You need to go out into the big bad world and decide when and where I'm going to practice being proactive, for example. And then what you need to do is, after you've deliberately practiced it, you need to reflect on it. You need to decide, well, did that go well? Is that something that resonates with me? Because this is like a hunch. I don't really have anything to back this next bit up with, but I think it's just as important to discard information as it is to retain it. So let's say, for example, like, be proactive. I think everyone could probably find a way to apply that to their lives, but there could be some other, leadership characteristic that just doesn't resonate with you or something, and you need to decide, is that something I can use? Should I kind of try and do that more and more, or should I do it less and less? Am I being too empathetic, say, for example? Am I being too soft with my team? Something like that. So I think it's just as important to discard something as it is to keep it, as to add it to your toolkit. So the Use Because business, for my own kind of mental health, if you like, I had to kind of stop that because it wasn't going anywhere. And something happened in my head about a year ago. I don't know, something just clicked, and I said, that's it. This is what I'm doing now. I'm not going to do it 20%. I'm going to do it at 100%. And it was a strange thing that, you read about it a lot in books about people just getting to that moment of truth, or that moment of decision, and things just start falling into place. Within 3 months, I had 2 co-founders, one tech person, Brian, and Jonathan, who's doing sales and marketing. And we had a platform built within a few weeks, because I knew exactly what it should be. I knew exactly where everything should go. I had started to build content. And then people started paying us, like, almost immediately. And even yesterday, somebody from a very big company found me through LinkedIn and is very excited because we are the solution to his problem. And he had the exact same problem that I mentioned at the start there, that the way they were delivering training wasn't working, and he knew that his employees were just trying to get through the content, just trying to get through that 2-hour session, and it wasn't working. So it's not needed. And if anything, the pandemic has accelerated the need for digital solutions. So I think we've arrived at a good time. The long answer to a very short question.
That was, but very interesting as well. So you kind of like spoken about setting up Tribel, etc. So how did you kind of take that? I know you said about the 3 pillars and kind of developing that, and then having your previous company, and then setting up Tribel, etc. But how did you kind of create and develop that and put that into kind of the online space, I guess?
Well, when I first started with Use Because, I had, I suppose, the bones of those 3 pillars. I had an idea that, you needed to present something to somebody that they could learn, that they could begin the learning process with. And so my background was, and I guess still is, in instructional design, so just creating e-learning content. And I'm quite good at it. I'm quite good at making it engaging and, get to the point, all that kind of stuff. But it was definitely not scalable for what I was trying to do. And that's when something clicked, and that's when Use Because went away and when Tribel started, because I realized that the 3 pillars kind of solidified in my mind about what learning actually is now. And I'm definitely open to disagreement on the 3 pillars, but I mean, I think for a high level it kind of makes sense. But and I understood that the first one is to understand. I didn't need to create e-learning content. I can just say it all into a microphone and just, get to the point quicker. And that's worked really well. So the understand part for us happens through a podcast. So before we started Tribel, I didn't. This is a good thing for anyone who's thinking about starting a business, is just start. Like I started recording podcasts, just talking about books that really kind of resonated with me, not knowing what I was doing with the content, just knowing that it's probably going to turn into something eventually, but I don't know what. And it's almost like a leap of faith you have to take to just, I don't know why I'm doing this, but I have to do something. I have to just start. And that's what I did. So I started recording podcasts, like I said, not knowing what I was going to do with them, but knowing that the next 2 pillars were to help people remember and to help people to deliberately practice. And there was a guy, Brian, who's one of my co-founders. We worked together for that e-learning company I mentioned, and he was a web developer and web designer. So I had asked him before and he wasn't available, and the second time I asked him, he was available. So he came on like really quickly, and I was able to explain to him the concept that I put forward here. The remember part then presents itself in summaries, or spaced repetition summaries. So as soon as somebody's listened to one of our podcasts, they can hit a button that starts a timer. And what that timer does then is 24 hours after they've listened to the podcast, they get a mind map sent to them. And that mind map is just really quick, brief. Don't forget, this is what was covered in the podcast kind of thing. A week after that, then they get a video, a 60-second video or 90-second video, some of them. And again, same thing. This is what was covered in the podcast. And the third thing then is a cheat sheet. They get a week after that again. And all of them link back then to the action log, where they go and decide on the time and the place. So it's literally just they log in and they pick one of the key takeaways from a book, and they go and deliberately practice it. And then it just all flows from there. So all of the stuff we've built is off the shelf at the moment. We're because we are still fairly new, we're looking to looking for investment, obviously, like a lot of startups, but we want to make sure that what we're building is actually specifically going to solve the problem that we think it solves. So everything is off the shelf on WordPress at the moment, but I think a lot of companies kind of get bogged down in trying to build their tech stack, but a lot of the things you can build a lot just by kind of being clever with off the shelf stuff. So I'm putting in some proper spade work, so how we built it was like a lot of it kind of just came from. Actually, I'll go back a step. I'm sitting here looking at my bookshelves and I'm thinking, one of the things I wanted when I started Use Because is I wanted to get paid to read books. Like, my default setting is to, if I'm left alone, it'll be a coffee, a chair, and a book. Generally non-fiction books, and that's like my default setting. And that was one of my starting points, and that's why we kind of use books as the starting point. And the way I kind of think of it is that all of these books, like the 7 Habits, are influenced by Robert Cialdini, and what else can I say there? Freakonomics, we haven't done that one yet. To Sell is Human, Daniel H. Pink. All of these books, there's a lifetime of value in those books. There's a lifetime of knowledge in those books if you can unlock it for people correctly. So that's what I wanted to do, and that's why we use books as our starting point, is because it's a lifetime of knowledge, like I said, and we want to present it to people in a way that allows them to learn quickly without taking massive amounts of time out of their day to do it. So
that's great. So it sounds like obviously you found the right experts to work with you, and you found that expertise to kind of develop those bits. Are there any parts of this that didn't go to plan during that development phase?
No, everything's gone perfectly. No, yeah, of course. Like any business is going to, you have to kind of fail forward, I think, and I hate kind of using some of those cliches sometimes, but I'm a big believer that things are cliches because they're true. They stick around because they're real. Yeah, like they say that they use because that was like 3 years of my life, and I talk a lot about what I call invisible hours. The hours that you put into something that don't result in what you hope it'll result in. And I've explained this to I've mentored a few people and that I kind of like, you can kind of explain this concept of invisible hours and like in general terms, but in specific terms, like if you think about what my day used to be like, I would have a full-time job. I'd come home. I still have young kids, and I'd be, back in the day, they were even younger, and I'd be putting them to bed or giving them bottles and all that kind of stuff. And then you have your own dinner, and then it's like 7 or half 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening, and it's at that point you have to open your laptop, doing work that may or may not be like, you could do work that nobody cares about. You could spend months trying to put together some concept of what your business is going to be, or creating content or whatever, and you can put it out there into the world and it's crickets, it's tumbleweed, nobody cares. That's a very, very difficult thing for a lot of people to deal with, I think. And I would always say to anyone who's thinking about starting a business is to go in with your eyes open, that you might do all this work and it might not result in what you hope it results in. You might not even get close. Nobody might care. So, and that's what it was like with Use Because for a long time, that I was doing work hoping it would turn into something, and it didn't. But then those kind of things, that it comes back to, it fundamentally comes down to the story that you tell yourself about what's possible for you. And as wishy-washy as that might sound, that is where it begins. Sometimes you hear it when you're a kid, like, well, why not you? Why can't you be, a professional athlete or whatever? You have to start with the story that you tell yourself about what's possible for you. And once you get that right in your head, and once I had accepted that I'm doing this work for me first and foremost, I'm doing it knowing, I'm going into doing this work knowing that this might not turn into anything. This might not become what I think it's going to become. Nobody might care. And if I was able to make peace with that, and once I was able to make peace with that and decided I was doing this work for me first and foremost, that's when the podcast started. That's when my two co-founders just kind of popped up out of nowhere. That's when, I wouldn't say customers are flocking to us, but that's when, people started to kind of ask questions about what we were doing, and started to put a toe in the water with us. It's not like that's not guaranteed to happen, Brandon, but something just changed in my head. So those failures are, they're real, they're necessary, and they're unavoidable, I think. The e-learning stuff, that was probably a year of my life trying to convert business books into e-learning content that I still have on a Google Drive, all articulate storyline files. Like, some of them are just a massive web of interconnected scenes. that all worked very well, but totally unscalable. So they were the kind of things I was doing at the beginning, was in the evenings opening my laptop, trying to figure out why a trigger wasn't working or something, or why this wasn't connecting to, and then doing all that work thinking nobody might care about this. Like this might go nowhere. So, and I'm at a stage now, I think, with having run businesses myself before and working on Tribel now, that failures happen, and I just like water off a duck's back. I just whatever. Like we try things all the time that don't work, or you reach out to somebody you think could be a great guest on the podcast, or somebody you'd like to partner with or something, and they don't even answer your email. So those failures happen like constantly. Like, so it's just like I said at the start there, you just need to fail forward and just kind of I don't know, just accept it's part of the game.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's part and parcel of having your own business, and those kind of hidden hours that you were talking about. Is you have to test and learn from what will work, what won't work, and not every business is the same. So one business might do something and it really works well for them, but for other businesses that are set up differently, it might not. But that is kind of part and parcel of that, and you have to have that patience and desire to kind of make it work, I think.
Do you know what it comes down to as well, Katie? It comes down to, the Simon Sinek book. Do you ever read that one, Start With Why? The people buy why you do something. They buy what and how you do after that. And that was like a big thing for me, is that, why am I doing this? Like, what is the purpose of me? Like, why don't I just get a job as an instructional designer and settle into it? And I worked for Salesforce, an amazing company, and there was a career path laid out for me. I could have got promoted again, and it just wasn't resonating with me. And I remember that book, Start With Why, was a big one for me. That, like, why do I want to start? Why am I so determined to start my own business? And then, actually, it wasn't to start my own business. That was never my goal. I shouldn't have said that, because that's not what I was trying to do. My goal was and always will be, is to be the best teacher in the world. That's what I'm striving for. Being an entrepreneur is the necessary vehicle for me to achieve that, because I wasn't going to achieve it under the umbrella of another company. But as long as well as Start With Why, there was another book I read called Mastery by Robert Greene. Now, I've recommended that book to people. Friends of mine actually have bought it, and that's not really for them. There was a very kind of dense and heavy book, but in this book, Mastery, he talks about your life's task. Right, so there's a set of experiences that you've had, there's knowledge that you've gained, and there's things that you're interested in, and all of those things together, they gather up into something that's kind of niche and unique to you. And your life's task is to basically find and pursue that thing, whatever it is. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to be an entrepreneur. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be career focused. But that book is about mastery, and it's about, why is it that we still talk about Leonardo Da Vinci, centuries after he died? What was it about him that made him master so many different areas? Or Mozart, or he in the book he talks about, I can't remember the people's names now because they're still alive and doing their thing, but he talks about other people who have mastered things in the modern age. And what is it that they've done? And one of the things he talks about is this idea of your life's task, is to find out what it is, what those things are, your knowledge and your experiences and your interests. And he gives a really good starting point. So the book is kind of laid out into, like, how to find what you should apprentice in, how to run your apprenticeship, how to find masters or mentors to learn from, and then how to kind of go against the grain then. But one of the things he talks about is to find your life's task, which is really, really interesting, was to think about what you are interested in around about the age of 7 or 8. And the reason he says, like, that's obviously like a vague enough age, like it could be anywhere between 6 and 10 really. But he says around that age that you're probably getting a little bit more freedom from your parents or your guardians, whoever is minding you, that you could, like, say my own eldest daughter now, she she's allowed out without us, like she goes out to play by herself. Around that age, you start to get that little bit more freedom. You probably don't have a mortgage at the age of 8, so you are free from any real responsibilities. So you'll naturally gravitate towards something. So it could be that you're interested in nature. It could be that you're interested in playing computer games or video games, or I just like watching TV, whatever. But it's not just necessarily about what you're interested in. It's the feeling that that thing gives you. And he gives an example of Einstein. When he was 5, his dad gave him a compass, like a north, south, east, west compass. And Einstein was just, his mind was blown that there was this invisible force that was acting on the needle, making it point north. And he's like, he just could not get his head around this force that he couldn't see or feel was acting on this needle. And so Einstein himself said that was the beginning for him that led him down the path of being a physicist. And even Einstein himself would say that he wasn't the smartest person, even though, like, we kind of hold him up as being Einstein essentially, but he would say that he wasn't smarter than anyone else. He just would stay with a problem for longer. And his starting point was that idea of these invisible forces. He just wanted to know more about it. So my business, like, another thing as well I read, this is all getting very deep, Katie, but I'll go with it. Another thing I remember, I don't know if I read it or I heard it, I might have done both, but it was Tony Robbins, who's a bit of can be a bit divisive. Some people think he's full of rubbish. Other people think he's brilliant, but he has some good points. And he has this course called Business Mastery. And he said everyone who owns or runs a business should ask themselves 2 questions. And the first question is, what business am I in? And when I thought about that, I think, well, I'm an ed tech company. We provide soft skill training for individuals in whatever way you want to phrase it. But the second question is, what business are you really in? And he said that's what's going to drive the company. Without writing values on the wall or coming up with a fancy mission statement, what business are you really in? And my answer to that, the reason that Tribel exists, is to light the path to inner peace for anyone who might be looking. Like I said, it's an ed tech company and we're a startup and it's a digital platform and whatever, but that's my driving force, to be the best teacher in the world so that I can light the path for people to inner peace, both professionally and personally. And I think for me, it's in books. It's unlocking the knowledge of other people's lives that they've put into books. So I can't even remember your question now, Katie, but I think I've vaguely answered it.
No, I think you have, definitely. So what do you think the future for Tribel will be?
The Netflix of personal development. That's what I'm like. I was only laughing with my co-founders yesterday. We were we're kind of getting to a point where there's like money arriving in the bank account that I control, just because I set up the company, and we were laughing about, exits and stuff. Anyone who's into startups, like, everyone loves an exit. I have no interest in exiting this company ever. Like I often have said to my wife, like, my wife jokes like about, buying new houses and cars and stuff. And I'm like, well, if I was to sell Tribel, I'd just start it again. I don't know what else to do. Like this is my life's task, is to use this as a vehicle to be the best teacher in the world. What that looks like, I don't know. Like I want to keep doing what we're doing. I want to obviously expand into more companies. I want to offer more solutions to people who are looking for them. What the future looks like, I don't know. Like I just, at the moment, things are going well. We have a plan, but I know that my intrinsic motivation is unquenchable. Really, it's not something I'm doing just to make a quick buck. I genuinely want to connect with our customers. I genuinely want to connect with the users beyond those customers, the individuals who are using our platform. I want to have deep conversations with them about what we're doing, what more we can offer, how we can do it, there's a big movement at the moment about, you know, bringing your whole self to work, and so I think we've arrived at the right time for that. And especially with, you know, the last couple of years that have, you know, turned everyone's lives upside down. You know, everyone has been on a video call where kids have walked in, or the cat has walked across the keyboard or something like, and there's no point pretending that we're two different people when we're in work as opposed to when we're at home. So I believe that what we're offering allows somebody to develop themselves personally, which will automatically transfer into developing themselves professionally. Like, there should be no separation, and there isn't any separation. But I think before we used to pretend there was, like, you know, I'm not saying you should, you know, be a slob on, you know, when you show up in the office or something, but like, you can still present yourself professionally, but I think you should be your authentic selves. And I think what our platform offers and will continue to offer is a way for people to kind of look inward, rather than, you know, like say for example, somebody who's interested in being in sales. Say somebody is 23 or 24 and they're just out of college, and they think they want to go into sales. They need to look intrinsically. They need to look inwards to what it means, so that they can genuinely present a solution to a customer, rather than trying to use persuasion techniques to separate the customer from their money. They're the kind of people we want to talk to. They're the kind of people we want to use our platform, is to understand how to actively listen, how to ask open-ended questions, how to really get behind an objection that a customer might have. Like, it's one of those classic things with sales. If somebody says no to you, that sometimes it just means tell me more. It's not about separating somebody from their money. It's that I haven't given them enough comfort yet. It's those kinds of things that we want to continue to present to people, and I don't think our job will ever be done. I don't think we'll ever be finished, because there'll always be more people who are looking to learn. So that's a vague answer to your question, but specifically, we're just going to keep building content. We're going to I was actually thinking about starting a book club as well. I think that's what I'd like to do. Books and beer. I think I'll do it like 7 o'clock in the evening, and set a book, or get somebody to vote on a book. Bring along a couple of alcoholic beverages if that's your thing, and talk about a book for an hour. I want to do mystery books. I want to, because I think people do judge a book by its cover, because that's what the cover is for. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to do a mystery book on the podcast, where we talk about a book, but you don't find out the name of the book until the end of the podcast. We want to do mashups. So say, for example, this is something I noticed fairly early on when I started reading these books specifically for the podcast. You could read 2 books on negotiation that say the exact opposite to each other. So who's right? Like, they can't both be right, or can they? So I want to do mashups where we'll get people to read a book each, and then come and basically argue their side about what's right and what's wrong. But the thing is, what I noticed about, you know, negotiation, say for example, is that it depends on the situation. So it depends on, you know, on who you're talking to, how well you know them, so on and so forth. So this is the thing about the soft skills, or the behavioral skills, as we like to call them. They are, when you're teaching it to somebody, the way our platform is built is it'll teach it to you discreetly. Like, and I don't know if that's a word that everyone uses. I use it mathematically. Discreetly means like individual points. I learned that doing an engineering degree, but as opposed to continuously, right? So discreetly would mean we'll teach you, be proactive, think win-win, begin with the end in mind. We'll teach them to you individually, but in reality, in the real world, you have to these things all kind of mash over each other and kind of, you know, all kind of blend together. So you have to unlock these things one bit at a time. You have to look at the conflicts, and you have to figure that out in real time. Sometimes there's a great book actually we covered on the podcast called The Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko Willink, who was a former Navy SEAL commander, and he talks about that exact thing about when it comes to leadership. So I like one just off the top of my head is do I train this person or do I fire them? And that's like a dichotomy of like, well, it's two ends of the scale there. Which one do I do? And a lot of the time, leadership is about finding that balance, or kind of, making those decisions in real time. So our company is going to be the Netflix of personal development. That's the short answer.
That's great. It's really interesting and quite refreshing to talk to someone that's so passionate about their business and what they're actually delivering. Thank you very much, Kevin, for joining me. If people want to connect with you or find out more about you and about Tribel, how do they get in touch?
The website is mytribel.com, and actually a customer asked us yesterday. I said, well, mytribel.com cost €8, Tribel.com cost €5,000. So we went
wow.
Yeah, and it's actually, another thing as well. One of my pet hates with startups is when they spell the name of their startup wrong. Like they drop out all the vowels or something. But then I spell Tribel wrong because it's Tribel. .com, so mytribel.com, and the reason I did it that way is because it's short for Tribe of Learners. So I slightly hate myself for it, but also makes sense, so I had to do it. So yeah, you can just get on there, or you can just email me directly at kevin@mytribel.com, and we would be delighted to talk to anyone who wants to talk to us, essentially.
Awesome, that's great. We'll add those links to the show notes below. And thank you again for joining me.
No, it's great, Katie. It's been lovely to talk to you, and thanks very much for having me on.
Thank you.